Well, let's discuss this further now with our panel. Joining me here in the studio is Abdulla Banndar Al-Etaibi, Assistant Professor in International Affairs at Qatar University. And in London, Ellie Geranmayeh, she's the Deputy Programme Director and a Senior Policy Fellow for MENA, the Middle East North Africa, at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you both for joining us on Al Jazeera. Professor, let me start with you here in the studio in Doha. The Iranians have yet to confirm, by the way, that they will be attending any talks in Doha, even though the Americans are saying that they'll send a technical team as well as a high-level team to the Qatari capital. So how do you view these talks and the status of the Memorandum of Understanding? Can the agreement still be salvaged in Doha?
Well, that's a good question, Folly. I think what we have seen so far with the Iranian behavior, I think if we put them in World Cup language, they're playing at the stoppage time, basically. They're trying to play at the last moment so they could get something out of the US, out of the mediators, put more pressure on them. And we heard today the president of Iran talking about the frozen funds. I think this is something they want to get paid, basically, to meet the Americans, basically. This is what they're trying to do. The thing is it's very complicated because these talks were supposed to be held today, actually, but then they postponed it, according to the reports, and moved to Doha, basically. Now,
why were they moved to Doha, just out of curiosity? What's Qatar's role here at this stage of the negotiations?
I think it's just a change of time, of venue, basically, because they met before in Islamabad, they met in Switzerland, now they're meeting in Doha. It's about different venues, but the same goal, which is de-escalation and finding a deal. And now this is one of the biggest challenges, Foley, is how to move the MOU to be a reality, basically. And this is where it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, and this is the biggest test. Because what the Iranians are doing is they're just mixing up everything, and they're saying, well, there is no stop of killing and fighting in Lebanon, so this is for Hormuz. But the thing is, when you talk about number 5 of the memorandum, it's basically about the safe passage. And this is something Iran is not actually guaranteeing because they want the world and the region to be under their mercy to follow their lives. And this is something that should be discussed tomorrow.
Ellie, let me bring you into the conversation. Your thoughts about these reported talks in Doha that the Iranians, again, have not confirmed that they're attending. What do you think their calculations are right now, Iran? And do you think this new track can succeed in salvaging the agreement?
So look, I do think at the end of the day, the Iranians will show up in Doha, even if it's going to be relapsing back to these proximity talks that are held through mediation by Qatar. Qatar is quite an important venue because this is where Iran's 6 billion frozen assets sit. And this is a question that Iran wants now answered in terms of when that money is released and exactly what it can be used for. And this has been one of the points of tension between the US and Iran in the first days following the Memorandum of Understanding, is quite different messaging about how Iran can freely or not use that money on whatever it wishes to. So the US is saying it can only buy American goods for humanitarian purposes. The Iranians are saying, no, actually, we are not going to be dictated by the Americans on what we spend this money for. So Qatar does play an important role in terms of that's the place the money sits, but also it's where we know that in the last hours before the Memorandum of Understanding was established, it was Qatari mediation that really basically bridged the divide that was preventing the two sides from signing the agreement in the last days before it finally came to fruition. So I think now, given the escalation we've seen in the past few days, the Qatari mediation is now necessary again to get the two sides to sort of hold back and prevent spoiler activities that we're seeing emerge again from both of them in this revolving door between escalation on a Friday to a Sunday and then going back to negotiations at the beginning of the week. And what we need now is some, serious period of concentrated diplomacy where we are not relapsing back to this shootout in the Strait of Hormuz, because if we keep having this every 48 hours, we're not going to have the free passage of vessels that both the Americans want, and at the end of the day, it's what the Iranians want, because until that blockade is open from both sides, Iran is not going to be able to access the money freely that is frozen abroad.
Professor, let me ask you about that. The frozen assets I'll come to in just a moment, but just on the Strait of Hormuz first. Tehran sees responsibility for the Strait of Hormuz as solely its domain. They're suggesting coordination with the Omanis over the Strait. What would a realistic agreement look like from the Gulf's perspective? Would Gulf states accept a formal role for Iran and Oman in administering the Strait so long as they have safe access to it?
Well, I think for the GCC countries, it's either to go back before February 28th, or we just go all together to manage the Strait of Hormuz. I think this is something maybe the regional countries want. It doesn't mean if you're sitting next to the door that you block the door for people to leave, basically, the room. This is what the Iranians are doing, basically, because they sit next to the Strait, so they feel like they could blockade and block the livelihood.
When you say we all manage the Strait, what does that mean?
Having some sort of an arrangement or coordination among the GCC countries, plus Iran, and plus Iraq as well. Why not? Because Iraq is also having this is the only way for them to access the waters through the Strait of Hormuz. And therefore, this could be a way of finding coordination within the region to build trust, because the trust has been hurt so bad by the Iranian missiles and drones. So this could be one of the suggestions on the table. But the problem is Iran wants to take that solo, basically. They want to dominate it. This is why they rejected the Omani southern lines that was actually decided with the IMO. So basically, because the Iranians want to use it as a bargaining chip. But this is basically mobilizing the globe, mobilizing the regional countries against them, because now they're actually messing around and they're not willing to sit down and talk.
Ellie, your thoughts about the sort of agreement they could come up with on the Strait of Hormuz that would satisfy this region?
So look, I completely accept that the solution for the Strait of Hormuz has to involve the regional countries that are sitting on the strait and also affected by its free passage most directly, including Qatar here. But we shouldn't forget the fact that Iran has just undergone a year of conflict with two of the world's biggest military powers. And it feels at the moment a great sense of confidence that it has basically pushed the war into a negotiation phase. And it doesn't want to, through that negotiation phase, now lose this, weapon of mass disruption that it has awoken through this war by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And I think the upset in Tehran last week when Oman and the IMO announced this new transit passage was because it felt that it was excluded from that new formula that was coming about, and that the Americans were trying to, through their Gulf diplomacy, find a way that was going to exclude Iran out of the future management. So until we have a truly inclusive arrangement with all parties, and we may need here a international actor like the IMO to actually step in and manage that fund in which everyone gets a share of the economic pie that comes from whatever service fees are charged. I think that distrust will continue to hinder this formula going forward.
Thank you both. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. I had so many other questions to both of you, but thank you so much for joining us on the News Hour. Ellie Geranmayeh in London and Abdulla Banndar Al-Etaibi here in Doha with me. Thank you so much.